Have you ever heard of the halo effect? It's a psychological phenomena where we tend to think of somebody who is more good looking or attractive as also being more skillful, intelligent and capable. I imagine the same is true for audio products, to a degree. If you have two similar audio devices where one of them looks better to you, I think you'll probably assume that the better looking one will also sound better, at a subconscious level anyway. Because our auditory systems are prone to suggestion, that will probably result in you initially hearing the better looking one as also sounding better, at least for a little while. Just like if you hired a good looking employee who later turned out to be a little bit daft, if the better looking audio device isn't actually better, you'll soon notice that too after listening to your favourite tunes. That intro may make you think that you know where I'm going with this review of the AEMA A80 amplifier. But don't jump to conclusions just yet. Amplifiers are different from people, and that's going to become very evident shortly. The AEMA A80 is a Class D speaker amp for about $200 and for that money it's also got an onboard DAC and a few other tricks. Curiously, it costs about the same amount of money as the AEMA A70 that I reviewed a little while back. It also offers the same basic power output, which is a maximum output of 300 watts into 4 ohms. Of course, realistically, you'll get something closer to 200 watts into 4 ohms continuously, depending on the levels of distortion you're happy with. And the A80 also uses the same TPA3255 amplifier chip that was in the A70, as well as a PFFB or a post-filter feedback loop that was also available in the A70, and NE5532 op amps, which, you guessed it, were also in the A70. On paper, the A80 looks like the A70 in a new suit of clothes, and admittedly with a few new tricks up its sleeve. The A80's lovely display and control knob allows you to easily switch between the various inputs, and those inputs include both balanced and unbalanced analog inputs, just like the A70. There's also an auxiliary output for your sub, just like the A70, but the inclusion of the ES9038Q2M DAC chip in the A80 means that it does also offer you a USB-C input, as well as coaxial and optical inputs too. It also has a Bluetooth receiver, complete with aptX HD capabilities, but no LDAC. And it's a little bit smarter too, with the ability to go into sort of a standby mode when there's no signal coming in, and then automatically wake from standby mode when it senses signal again. Or you can use the 12-volt trigger input, that's there too, like it was on the A70. And then the display itself also offers some nice visual customization of the device with a mono VU meter, stereo VU meters, or a spectrum analyzer display. It also provides the opportunity for bass and treble tone controls. So let's now come back to that halo effect. Have AEMA just made a flashier looking A70 with some extra bells and whistles to trick us into thinking that it sounds better? And why does the A80 cost the same as the A70 whilst having extra bells and whistles and seemingly nothing lost? Speaking of costs, I should mention that you need to spend about an extra $20 to get the 48 volt power supply with the A80. That's how I've tested it, and it's what you need if you want the maximum power output from the A80. The pricing of the A80 is a little bit confusing, and availability seems a little bit patchy as well at the moment, but it's a new product. And so if you do choose to buy the A80, I would recommend getting it with the 48 volt power supply, just to make sure it's got the best possible chance of driving your speakers effectively. But that might be jumping the gun, because probably what I should do is clarify first if you even should buy the A80. I think the A80 is much nicer looking than the A70. It also offers way more features, and useful features at that. It's much nicer to use. Unfortunately though, the halo effect isn't enough to overcome the differences when you compare these two. Whatever is different between the A70 and the A80 is enough to leave the A70 coming across as more detailed, more focused, and more dynamic. That doesn't make the A80 a bad sounding amplifier, especially given its price and features, but I think the A70 as a foundation proves that the A80 could have been better. If you've bought the A80 already though, or you're planning to, don't despair. Remember what I said before, amps are very different from people. Unlike the better looking but unfortunately daft employee that we talked about before as an example, you can give your A80 a personality transplant. I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment, but first let's get a better understanding of what the A80 delivers straight out of the box. Listening to the A80 from its USB input using the internal DAC reveals a solid sounding amp. It's not remarkable, but it's far from bad. Combining its good sound with fantastic interface and feature set, the A80 is a solid choice for anybody seeking an affordable and good sounding amp. For those seeking great sonic performance at the price, you will need to look elsewhere. One way that you could upgrade the sound quality of the A80 is the use of an external DAC. That can increase the resolution, the soundstage size, and the imaging accuracy of the A80. That's assuming the external DAC is a decent one. Even so, connecting that same external DAC to the AEMA A70 will deliver even better sound still. I was running a stupidly high-end setup for my testing, but it was handy because it gave me maximum insight into these devices. Specifically, I was using the Chord M-Scaler and the Chord Dave for digital duties before the A80 amp, and I was running the outputs of the A80 into the PROAC Response DB2 speakers. Swapping between the A70 and the A80, there are definite similarities between these two. What clearly separated these two though, is that the A80 is the smoother sounding amp. There was less texture in the strings while I was listening to Beethoven Symphony No. 1 through the A80. The soundstage also shifted up a little bit with the A80 and seemed taller overall. Further listening had me wondering though if the A80's soundstage was just a bit more vague in its boundaries, whereas the A70 felt more focused. As the Symphony built in its intensity, the A80 just couldn't match the sense of energy and attack that the A70 did. The drama was missing from the A80. I also found that the occasional solo instrumental lines were a little bit less defined from the A80, less separated from the rest of the sounds. It was lacking the magic, but it didn't make sense. On paper, these are the same amplifier in different clothes. I was doubting myself, but my tests were also going against my expectations that the newer, sexier unit should sound better. Switching to a new track left me with no doubts. These amps are two clearly different beasts. The sound on Take Your Mama was much crisper and cleaner from the A70. It was almost too much when pairing this track and the A70 and the Response DB2 speakers. They've got very defined and crisp treble response from their ribbon tweeters, and as I spent longer with the combinations of the A70 with the DB2s and the A80s with the DB2s and a whole lot of different tracks, it became evident to me that the A70 would actually get fatiguing sooner with this particular setup depending on the tracks. With brighter, more energetic recordings like compressed modern pop music, the A70 can be a little bit too much. And the same would apply if you're inserting the A70 into a system that's already a bit bright or energetic. The A80 would be the better choice in those situations, but it's not such a good choice for a lot of classical music. And the A80 would also be a bit too smooth on warmer, more relaxed systems. So the A80 is a nice amp, depending on your system characteristics and your listening preferences. But it's still only a nice amp, it's not a great amp. To be fair, it is only $200. But what if you want better sound in a compact, feature-filled package? Let's briefly talk about how you can give the AEMA A80 a personality overhaul in a way that you can't with a good-looking but daft employee. If you remove the 4 screws on the back of the A80 and 2 screws underneath, you can slide out the circuit board. Just be sure to go slowly so you don't yank out the ribbon cable that connects from the main circuit board over to the display. On the circuit board, you'll see a bunch of really crooked capacitors. I don't know what's going on there. Hopefully you will see a series of nicely laid out capacitors, but more importantly, you'll see a pair of NE5532 op amps. These are responsible for handling the signal when it first arrives at the amplifier, either from the DAC chip or from your external source. Whatever these do with the signal is going to then be amplified and output through the TPA3255 Class D amp chip. Unfortunately, the NE5532 op amps are a bit cheap and a bit basic. They're fine, they're just not fantastic. There are much better options out there, both in the form of silicon op amp chips like the NE5532s, or in the discrete designed larger op amps from companies like Sparkos Labs or Burson Audio. For my testing, I decided to use the Burson Audio V7 Vivid op amps. These are one of the best on the market, and I used them because I wanted to see just how good the A80's amplification circuits could get. For others of you wanting to try this, please be gentle. The V7 op amps will place some pressure against the little capacitors right next to the op amp sockets. And so you need to take care when you're inserting and removing the op amps. And then when you go to slide the circuit board back into the casing, the V7 Vivids or the V7 Classics will just touch the top of the casework. If you go slowly and gently, there's not enough pressure to be worried about when you're getting them in there. And in fact, the touching of the op amps against the casework will probably help with cooling. Just take care and be gentle. What I heard when I upgraded to the $169 Burson V7 Vivid op amps in the A80 was a significant improvement in soundstage width, in image separation, image focus and clarity, and even the overall sense of resolution from the A80 amp. In other words, better op amps will significantly improve the sound of the A80, and you can turn it into a really nice sounding amplifier. If you're balking at the idea of spending $169 on op amps for a $200 amplifier, I don't blame you. But my experience with op amps like the OPA 1612s in the AYAMA A70 amplifier would suggest that you can still get great improvements from much cheaper silicon chip style op amps in the A80. In other words, don't feel that you have to go crazy to get better sound, but if you want to go crazy, there is a nice set of gains to be had. And also, don't feel like you have to upgrade the A80 to enjoy it. Remember, it's already a solid sounding amplifier for its price, especially if you enjoy more energetically mixed music or have a brighter system setup. Of course, you can also use the onboard tone controls to bump the treble up a bit and give it a little bit more sense of clarity. And so after all of this, I think the A80 is a really solid choice for those of you that maybe aren't prioritizing absolute premium sound so much as having fantastic convenience, fantastic features, and really solid sound in a compact, affordable package. The fact that you can then swap the op amps in the A80 to upgrade it if you want to, that's a bonus. And so if that sounds good to you, I'll put some links in the description down below where you can go and pick up the A80 for yourself. Of course, if you'd prefer to go in a different direction, I'll put my video up here where I talk about the Fosi Audio V3 mono amps, which are probably the better choice if you're going for pure sound quality rather than features. So take a look at that one next, but for now, thank you to YouTube channel members, thank you to channel Patreon members, and thank you to those of you who leave super thanks on videos like this one. And until next time, happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here again soon on Passion for Sound.